Welcome to today's episode of Historical Documentaries. Picture this. It's September 15th, 1940. Above the rolling English countryside, 1,500 German aircraft blacken the sky like a plague of steel locusts. This is the largest air armada ever assembled, sent by Adolf Hitler to crush Britain's spirit and pave the way for Operation Sea Lion, the Nazi invasion of the British Isles. But something extraordinary happened that day. Something the German High Command never anticipated. Their invincible Luftwaffe encounters not just brave pilots in Spitfires and Hurricanes, but an invisible web of technology so revolutionary, so secret, that it would change warfare forever. The Germans called it the Wizard War, a battle fought not just with guns and bombs, but with radio waves, mathematical calculations, and an intricate network of communication that could track their every move before they even crossed the English Channel. Today, we're going to uncover the secret weapon that truly won the Battle of Britain. It wasn't just courage in the cockpit or superior aircraft design. It was a technological marvel called the Dowding System, a revolutionary integration of radar, communications, and command that created the world's first integrated air defense network. This is the story of how a handful of British scientists, led by a stubborn old commander nicknamed Stuffy, used invisible radio waves to defeat the most powerful air force on Earth. This is the story of the secret weapon that destroyed the Nazi Luftwaffe. Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. The year is 1934. And across the English Channel, a monster is awakening. In the secret airfields of Nazi Germany, the Luftwaffe is being reborn from the ashes of the Treaty of Versailles. While Britain sleeps in the false peace of the interwar years, German engineers are designing aircraft that will soon fill the skies over Europe with thunder and terror. But in a small laboratory in Suffolk, at a place called Bawdsey Manor, a quiet revolution is beginning. The man leading this revolution doesn't look like a hero. Robert Watson Watt is a Scottish physicist with wild hair and thick glasses, more comfortable with mathematical equations than military strategy. Yet this unassuming scientist is about to create a weapon more powerful than any bomb. The story begins with a question that sounds like science fiction. Can radio waves kill a man? In February 1935, the Air Ministry receives disturbing reports from Germany. Nazi propaganda boasts of a death ray capable of bringing down aircraft at long distances. The British government, terrified of falling behind in this new arms race, turns to Watson Watt for answers. Watson Watt's assistant, Arnold Wilkins, spends 3 sleepless days calculating whether radio waves could generate enough energy to kill a pilot or destroy an aircraft. His conclusion is both reassuring and revolutionary. The death ray is impossible. It would require a radio transmitter the size of a power station to generate lethal energy. But something else emerges from those calculations, something far more valuable than any death ray. If radio waves can't kill aircraft, Wilkins tells Watson Watt, perhaps they can detect them. This moment, this flash of scientific insight in a cramped laboratory, will change the course of World War II. Watson Watt immediately grasps the implications. If radio waves bounce off metal objects, if those reflected signals can be captured and analyzed, then aircraft could be tracked long before they become visible to the human eye. The first test takes place on February 26, 1935, in a field near Daventry. Watson Watt and his team positioned their equipment 8 miles from a BBC radio transmitter. The plan is elegant in its simplicity. Use the BBC's powerful radio signal as a searchlight and listen for echoes bouncing off aircraft. As a Royal Air Force Hafer bomber flies back and forth through the radio beam, something miraculous happens on the oscilloscope screen. Green blips appear and disappear, tracking the aircraft's every movement. For the first time in human history, an aircraft has been detected by radio waves at a distance of 8 miles. The implications sent shockwaves through the British establishment. No longer would enemy aircraft be invisible until they appeared over the horizon. No longer would Britain's defenders be reduced to searching empty skies with binoculars, hoping to spot incoming bombers before they reach their targets. But Watt's demonstration catches the attention of another man, one whose vision will prove even more crucial to Britain's survival. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding watches the green blips on that oscilloscope and sees not just a scientific curiosity, but the foundation of an entirely new form of warfare. Dowding is everything Watt is not. Where the scientist is theoretical and gentle, Dowding is practical and tough. His colleagues call him stuffy for his rigid adherence to protocol and his inability to suffer fools gladly. But behind that stern exterior lies a mind of extraordinary strategic brilliance. As the newly appointed commander of RAF Fighter Command, Dowding faces an impossible challenge. Germany is building the most powerful air force in the world, with thousands of bombers and fighters rolling off assembly lines at unprecedented speed. Britain, meanwhile, has fewer than 700 operational fighters and a defense system that hasn't changed significantly since World War I. The conventional wisdom of air defense in 1935 is brutally simple. The bomber will always get through. This doctrine, preached by military theorists across Europe, holds that no defense can stop a determined bombing offensive. The only deterrent is the threat of retaliation, the promise that any nation attacking you will suffer equal destruction in return. Dowding rejects this fatalistic thinking. In the quiet corridors of the Air Ministry, he begins to envision something unprecedented, a defensive system so effective that bombers will not always get through. Watt's radar is the key, but Dowding understands that radar alone is not enough. Information is useless unless it can be processed, analyzed, and acted upon with lightning speed. Dowding begins to conceive of an integrated network that will link radar stations with fighter squadrons, command centers with individual pilots. This network will function like a vast nervous system, carrying information from the eyes of radar to the muscles of interceptor aircraft. As 1935 becomes 1936, two parallel revolutions begin. Watt and his team refine their radar technology, building more powerful transmitters and more sensitive receivers. Meanwhile, Dowding starts construction of the command and control infrastructure that will turn raw radar data into decisive action. The first permanent radar station rises at Bawdsey Manor in Suffolk. 4 steel towers, each 360 feet tall, stretch toward the sky like the fingers of some mechanical giant. These towers house the transmitting and receiving equipment for what will become known as Chain, Britain's early warning radar network. But even as this technological marvel takes shape, a more human drama unfolds. Dowding faces constant skepticism from his own colleagues. Many senior RAF officers remain wedded to the doctrine of offensive bombing. They see fighters as essentially defensive weapons, less glamorous and less decisive than bombers. Some question whether this expensive radar network is worth the investment. The Air Ministry's Director of Operations and Intelligence, Group Captain John Slessor, argues that Britain should focus on building bombers to deter German aggression rather than wasting resources on defensive gadgets. The debate becomes heated, with Dowding increasingly isolated in his conviction that defense can triumph over offense. Meanwhile, across the Channel, German intelligence begins to notice the strange towers sprouting along Britain's coastline. In 1939, the airship Graf Zeppelin conducts reconnaissance flights along the English coast, photographing these mysterious structures and attempting to intercept their radio signals. The German investigators detect radio transmissions on a frequency of 20 to 30 megahertz, but they cannot decipher their purpose. Some suspect radar, but the signals seem too crude, too simple to be effective. German radar technology, based on different principles, operates on much shorter wavelengths. They cannot believe that the British have achieved success with such apparently primitive equipment. This intelligence failure will prove costly. As 1939 becomes 1940, And as German forces sweep across Poland, Norway, and France, the Luftwaffe High Command remains largely ignorant of the invisible shield being constructed around Britain. They plan their air offensive assuming they will face the same radar-blind defenses that fell so easily in other countries. They are about to discover how wrong they are. By the summer of 1940, Dowding's vision has become reality. A chain of 29 radar stations stretches from the Orkney Islands to the Isle of Wight, capable of detecting aircraft 120 miles out to sea. More importantly, these stations are connected by thousands of miles of telephone cable to a network of filter rooms, operation centers, and airfields. The stage is set for the most decisive air battle in history. On one side stands the most powerful air force ever assembled, confident in its superiority and fresh from a string of victories across Europe. On the other side stands a revolutionary system that exists nowhere else in the world, a fusion of technology and organization that will determine whether democracy survives or falls to the Nazi war machine. The secret weapon is ready. Soon, it will be tested in the crucible of combat. Chapter 2. The Wizard of Bawdsey Manor in the summer of 1935. Bawdsey Manor stands like something from a fairy tale against the Suffolk coastline. Robert Watson Watt moves his small team into Bawdsey Manor in May 1935, transforming the elegant drawing rooms into laboratories and filling the manicured gardens with strange equipment. Local villagers whisper about the mysterious activity, watching as massive steel towers rise from the coastal meadows. They call Watson Watt the Wizard of Bawdsey, never suspecting that his magic will soon save their nation. The challenge facing Watson Watt seems almost insurmountable. Detecting aircraft with radio waves is one thing. Doing it reliably at useful distances is quite another. The initial experiments at Daventry achieved detection at 8 miles. Impressive for a proof of concept, but useless for military purposes. German bombers taking off from French airfields need to be detected at least 100 miles away to give RAF fighters time to intercept them. Watson Watt's solution requires a fundamental rethinking of radio technology. Most radio systems of the 1930s operate on relatively low frequencies, using long wavelengths that travel great distances but lack precision. For radar to work, Watson Watt needs much higher frequencies, shorter wavelengths that will bounce cleanly off aircraft and return strong, clear echoes. The first breakthrough comes in the autumn of 1935. Working with a team of brilliant young engineers, including Eddie Bowen and Taffy Williams, Watson Watt develops a radar system operating on a frequency of 22 megahertz. The results exceed all expectations. On September 17, 1935, the Bawdsey radar tracks an aircraft at a distance of 40 miles. By December, they achieve detection at 60 miles, but technical success brings new challenges. Each advance in radar technology reveals additional layers of complexity. How do you distinguish between enemy aircraft and friendly ones? How do you determine not just the distance to a target, but its direction and altitude? How do you prevent the system from being confused by weather, birds, or radio interference? The solution to the direction-finding problem comes from an elegant piece of engineering. The Bawdsey team constructs 2 receiving antennas separated by several hundred yards. By comparing the strength of the radar echo received at each antenna, operators can determine the bearing to the target aircraft. It's the same principle used by human ears to locate sounds, adapted for radio waves. Measuring altitude proves more difficult. Watson Watt's team experiments with multiple transmission frequencies, noting that radio waves of different wavelengths reflect differently from aircraft at various altitudes. By 1937, they develop a technique for determining aircraft height with reasonable accuracy, though this remains the most challenging aspect of early radar operations. As the technology improves, Watson Watt faces an equally daunting challenge: training operators to use it. Radar in 1936 is not the clean electronic displays of modern systems. Operators stare into cathode ray tubes, watching green traces that flicker and dance across the screen. Interpreting these traces requires skill, experience, and an almost intuitive understanding of how radio waves behave. The first radar operators are recruited from the ranks of radio amateurs, young men who have spent their evenings tinkering with wireless equipment in suburban garages and garden sheds. Many possess no formal scientific education, but they understand radio in ways that university-trained engineers sometimes do not. They can listen to the static from a radio receiver and distinguish between atmospheric interference and the characteristic swish of a radar echo. Among these pioneers is a young corporal named Nick Carter, who will later become one of the most skilled radar operators in the RAF. Carter describes his first encounter with the b.o.b radar. It was like learning to read a new language, written in squiggles of green light. At first, you saw nothing but noise. Then gradually, patterns emerged. You began to recognize the signature of a single aircraft, then a formation, then the difference between fighters and bombers. The training program at b.o.b becomes a model for technical education. Watson Watt insists that operators understand not just how to use the equipment, but why it works. They learn about radio propagation, atmospheric effects, and the physics of electromagnetic reflection. This deep understanding will prove crucial when the system faces the stress of combat. By 1937, the success at b.o.b has attracted the attention of the highest levels of government. Winston Churchill, then a backbench MP, but already a vocal critic of Nazi Germany, visits the manor in July 1937. Watson Watt demonstrates the radar by tracking a civil airliner flying from London to Paris. Churchill watches in fascination as the aircraft appears on the screen as a bright blip, moving steadily across the display. "This changes everything," Churchill tells Watson Watt. "This makes invasion of Britain impossible." But Watson Watt knows that radar alone cannot defend Britain. The technology is only as valuable as the system built around it. This is where Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding's vision becomes crucial. Dowding has been watching the development at b.o.b with intense interest, recognizing that radar's true potential lies not in its ability to detect aircraft, but in its capacity to guide interceptor fighters with unprecedented precision. The marriage between Watson Watt's technology and Dowding's strategic vision produces something entirely new in warfare: the concept of integrated air defense. Previous air defense systems relied on standing patrols, fighters that flew predetermined routes hoping to encounter enemy aircraft by chance. This approach was enormously wasteful of both fuel and pilot fatigue, and achieved interception rates of barely 30%. Dowding envisions something radically different: a system where fighters remain on the ground until radar detects incoming aircraft, then launch immediately to intercept them at precisely calculated positions. This approach requires split-second timing and perfect coordination between radar operators, command centers, and fighter squadrons. The first tests of this integrated approach take place in the summer of 1937. RAF fighters are vectored toward enemy aircraft, actually RAF bombers playing the role of attackers, using directions radioed from ground controllers watching radar displays. The results are revolutionary. Interception rates soar from 30% to over 75%. But these exercises also reveal new problems. Radio communications in 1937 are unreliable, subject to static, interference, and simple mechanical failure. Fighter pilots, accustomed to operating independently, struggle to follow precise heading and altitude instructions from ground controllers they cannot see. Watson Watt's team responds by developing new communication protocols and improved radio equipment. They create a standardized vocabulary for air-to-ground communications, ensuring that Angels 20 always means aircraft at 20,000 feet, And vector 090 always means fly on a heading of 090 degrees. These innovations seem minor, but they prove essential for the split-second coordination required for effective interception. As 1938 arrives, the mysterious towers of Chainholme begin appearing along Britain's coast. Each station follows the design perfected at Bodsey: 4 steel towers for transmission and 4 wooden towers for reception, connected by a maze of cables and housed in utilitarian concrete buildings. The stations are deliberately spaced to provide overlapping coverage, ensuring that no aircraft can slip through undetected. The construction of Chainholme represents one of the largest engineering projects in British history. Thousands of workers labor to erect the towers, lay the cables, then build the operations buildings. The project is conducted under the highest security, with workers forbidden to discuss their activities and security guards patrolling the construction sites. German intelligence notices the construction but misinterprets its significance. Reconnaissance flights photograph the towers, but German analysts conclude they are part of a radio navigation system or perhaps equipment for long-range communications. The possibility that these towers constitute a revolutionary air defense network never seriously enters German planning. This intelligence failure stems partly from German overconfidence in their own radar technology. German scientists have developed their own radar systems, notably the Freya early warning radar, which operates on much shorter wavelengths than Chainholme. German engineers, proud of their technical sophistication, cannot believe that the crude-looking British towers could represent advanced technology. They are about to learn how wrong they are. By the spring of 1940, Watson Watt's Wizard War has created an invisible shield around Britain. But this shield will soon face its ultimate test. Across the Channel, the Luftwaffe is preparing for the largest air offensive in history. The secret weapon that began with mathematical calculations in a Suffolk laboratory is about to determine the fate of Western civilization. Chapter 3: Stuffy Dowding's Grand Design in the autumn of 1936. A meeting takes place in the corridors of the Air Ministry that will determine the fate of Britain. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding sits across from his superiors, defending a revolutionary concept that most of them consider dangerously radical. The topic of discussion is not aircraft design or pilot training, but something far more abstract: the integration of technology, communication, and command into a unified system of air defense. Dowding's colleagues see him as an odd choice to lead this revolution. At 54, he is older than most senior commanders, with a reputation for inflexibility that has earned him the nickname Stuffy. His manner is formal, his speech is precise, and his patience for small talk virtually non-existent. Yet behind this stern exterior lies one of the most innovative military minds of his generation. The system Dowding proposes to the Air Ministry is unprecedented in its complexity and ambition. He envisions a network that will stretch from the Orkney Islands to Cornwall, linking radar stations, observer posts, command centers, and fighter squadrons into a single coordinated defense system. Information will flow upward from detection points to command centers, then downward as orders to fighter squadrons, all within minutes of an enemy aircraft appearing on radar. The principle is simple. Dowding explains to his skeptical audience, "We cannot afford to waste a single fighter or pilot in random patrols. Every aircraft must be directed to the precise point where it can do the most damage to the enemy. This requires complete situational awareness and instant communication." The Air Ministry's response is mixed. Some officers, particularly those from the bomber commands, remain convinced that the future of air warfare lies in offensive operations. They argue that Britain should focus on building bombers to deter German aggression rather than investing in defensive systems. Others worry about the cost and complexity of Dowding's proposed network. But Dowding has a powerful ally in the Air Minister, Lord Swinton, who understands the strategic implications of the new technology. Swinton authorizes Dowding to proceed with his grand design, but with limited resources and constant scrutiny from skeptics who believe the money would be better spent on conventional forces. The foundation of Dowding System is the concept of layered detection. Chain-home radar stations form the outer ring, capable of detecting aircraft 100 miles from the coast. But radar has limitations. It cannot effectively track aircraft once they cross the coastline, and it struggles to detect low-flying aircraft. To address these gaps, Dowding creates the Observer Corps, a network of civilian volunteers equipped with binoculars, charts, and telephone connections to command centers. The Observer Corps represents one of the most remarkable aspects of Dowding's vision. Rather than relying solely on advanced technology, he recognizes that human observation remains essential. Observer posts are established at strategic points across Britain, manned by volunteers who learn to identify aircraft by sight and sound. These volunteers, many of them elderly men ineligible for military service, become the human component of the radar electronic defense network. Training the Observer Corps requires developing entirely new skills and procedures. Observers must learn to distinguish between dozens of different aircraft types, often at great distances and under poor weather conditions. They must estimate altitude, count aircraft informations, and determine the direction of flight, all while maintaining constant telephone contact with command centers. The man who leads this training effort is Air Commodore Edward Gossage, a former World War I pilot who understands the critical importance of accurate aircraft identification. Gossage develops a systematic training program using aircraft silhouettes, scale models, and mock exercises. By 1939, the Observer Corps comprises over 30,000 volunteers organized into 1,400 observation posts across Britain. But detection is only the first step in Dowding System. The raw information from radar stations and observer posts must be processed, analyzed, and converted into actionable intelligence. This requires a revolution in military communications and command procedures. Dowding's solution is the filter room, a concept that transforms how military information is processed. At Fighter Command Headquarters in Bentley Priory, a team of specially trained personnel receives reports from radar stations and observer posts, plots aircraft positions on large-scale maps, and determines which tracks represent genuine threats. The filter room operates like a massive puzzle-solving exercise. Reports pour in from dozens of sources, often contradictory or incomplete. Experienced operators must determine which reports refer to the same aircraft, eliminate false echoes and mistaken observations, and build a coherent picture of enemy activity. This processed information is then passed to group and sector headquarters, where it guides the deployment of fighter squadrons. The most innovative aspect of the filter room is its use of Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAAF personnel as plotters and operators. Dowding, recognizing that the work requires patience, attention to detail, and manual dexterity, recruits young women to operate the plotting tables and telephone exchanges. These women, often barely out of their teens, become the nerve center of Britain's air defense. Flight Officer Vera Stokes, one of the first WAAF plotters, later describes the intensity of filter room operations. We worked in shifts around the clock, plotting aircraft movements on huge maps using colored counters. Each color represented aircraft detected at different times, so we could track how formations were developing. When a major raid was building up, the tension was enormous. You knew that lives depended on the accuracy of your plotting. The technical challenges of the filter room are immense. In 1937, there are no computers, no electronic data processing systems. Everything depends on human operators working with mechanical plotting devices and manual calculations. Yet Dowding's team develops procedures that allow them to process dozens of simultaneous tracks with remarkable accuracy. Communication between the filter room and operational units relies on a dedicated telephone network that represents one of the largest construction projects in British history. Thousands of miles of underground cables connect radar stations, observer posts, command centers, and airfields. This network is designed to survive bombing attacks, with multiple redundant connections and hardened communication centers. The hierarchy of command in Dowding System reflects his understanding that effective air defense requires both centralized coordination and decentralized execution. At the top sits Fighter Command Headquarters at Bentley Priory, which maintains the overall picture of enemy activity. Below this are 4 group headquarters, each responsible for defending a specific region of Britain. At the operational level are sector stations, each controlling several fighter squadrons within a defined geographic area. This hierarchical structure allows information to flow quickly from detection to action while maintaining overall coordination. When radar detects incoming aircraft, the filter room at Bentley Priory determines the threat level and alerts the appropriate group headquarters. The group passes the information to relevant sector stations, which scramble fighters and direct them to intercept positions calculated from radar tracking. The development of these procedures requires countless exercises and refinements. Throughout 1938 and 1939, Dowding conducts regular tests of the system, using RAF bombers to simulate German attacks. These exercises reveal numerous problems: communication delays, plotting errors, navigation mistakes, and coordination failures between different commands. Each exercise produces improvements in procedures, equipment, and training. Radio protocols are standardized to eliminate confusion. Plotting procedures are refined to increase accuracy and speed. Fighter pilots learn to follow ground-controlled interception procedures that seem counterintuitive to pilots trained for independent operation. One of the most significant innovations is the development of the scramble procedure. In previous air defense systems, fighters maintained standing patrols, consuming enormous amounts of fuel and pilot time. Dowding System allows fighters to remain on the ground until specific threats are detected, then launch rapidly to intercept at calculated positions. The scramble procedure requires precise timing and coordination. From the moment radar detects incoming aircraft, Fighter Command has approximately 20 minutes before enemy bombers reach London. In this brief window, the system must track the enemy formation, calculate its likely target, scramble appropriate fighter squadrons, and vector them to intercept positions. Achieving this level of coordination requires revolutionary changes in fighter pilot training. Pilots must learn to trust ground controllers they cannot see, following heading and altitude instructions radioed from operations rooms. This represents a fundamental shift from the individualistic fighter pilot tradition to a more systematic, team-based approach. As 1939 becomes 1940, Dowding's grand design nears completion. The chain-home network extends along Britain's coast. The observer corps is fully trained and deployed, and the communication and command systems are operational. But significant challenges remain. Many RAF officers still question whether this complex system will function under the stress of combat. German intelligence continues to underestimate British capabilities, planning their air offensive without understanding the defensive network they will face. The stage is set for the ultimate test of Dowding's vision. Soon, the most powerful air force in the world will discover that Britain is no longer defenseless. The grand design that began with radar experiments in a Suffolk laboratory is about to face its trial by fire. Chapter 4. The human computers in a basement beneath Bentley Priory. 50 young women sit at a massive table, plotting the movements of aircraft across a map of Britain. Their tools are simple: colored wooden blocks, metal croupier sticks, and headphones connected to telephone lines that stretch across the country. These women, most barely 20 years old, are about to become the nerve center of the most sophisticated air defense system in the world. They call themselves beauty coursers, though their official title is Women's Auxiliary Air Force Plotters. Their work requires no advanced degrees or technical training, yet their decisions will determine whether RAF fighters intercept German bombers or chase empty skies. In an age before computers, these young women serve as human processors, transforming raw data from radar stations and observer posts into the tactical intelligence that guides Britain's air defense. The creation of the WAAF plotting system represents one of Hugh Dowding's most inspired innovations. Traditional military thinking assumed that such critical work required experienced male officers. Dowding recognizes something his colleagues miss. The rapid processing of multiple information streams requires patience, attention to detail, and manual dexterity, qualities that young women often possess in abundance. The recruitment of WAAF plotters begins in earnest in 1938. The Air Ministry conducts nationwide recruiting drives, seeking young women with secondary education and demonstrated aptitude for detailed work. The requirements are specific: good eyesight, steady hands, clear speech, and the ability to work under pressure. Most importantly, recruits must pass rigorous security screening, as they will have access to some of Britain's most closely guarded military secrets. Among the first recruits is 18-year-old Elizabeth Quayle, a bank clerk from Manchester who responds to a newspaper advertisement seeking young women for important war work. Years later, she recalls her first impression of the filter room. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. This enormous room with a giant map table in the center, surrounded by galleries where supervisors could watch our every move. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, even during training exercises. The training program for WAAF plotters is both intensive and secretive. Recruits spend 6 weeks learning to interpret radar reports, plot aircraft positions, and operate the complex communication systems that link Bentley Priory with stations across Britain. They study aircraft recognition, learning to distinguish between dozens of different types from brief verbal descriptions. Most challenging of all, they learn to work as a coordinated team while processing multiple information streams simultaneously. The plotting table itself is a marvel of mechanical ingenuity. 30 feet square and marked with a detailed map of Britain and the surrounding seas. It displays aircraft positions using colored wooden blocks called plots. Each color represents aircraft detected during a specific 5-minute period. Red for the most recent reports, yellow for 5 minutes old, blue for 10 minutes old. As time passes, plotters move the blocks from red to yellow to blue, creating a visual timeline of aircraft movements. Operating the plotting table requires choreographed precision. As reports arrive from radar stations and observer posts, supervisors sitting in raised galleries around the room shout instructions to the plotters. Plot 47, hostile formation, 30 plus, approaching Dover, Angels 15, Vector 270. The plotters must instantly translate these coded messages, place the appropriate blocks on the map, and track their movement as additional reports arrive. The challenge becomes exponentially more complex when multiple raids develop simultaneously. During major attacks, dozens of aircraft formations may be approaching Britain from different directions. The filter room must track each formation separately, determine which represent genuine threats, and eliminate false reports caused by radar errors or multiple sightings of the same aircraft. This process of distinguishing between different aircraft tracks requires extraordinary skill and judgment. Sergeant Joan Mortimer, one of the most experienced filterers, describes the mental challenge. You had to hold a 3-dimensional picture in your mind, not just where aircraft were, but where they had been and where they were going. Sometimes you would get 6 different reports of the same formation, each with slightly different positions or numbers. Learning to see the pattern behind the confusion was the hardest part. The human element becomes even more critical when dealing with the limitations of 1940 technology. Radar coverage is incomplete, particularly at low altitudes and inland areas. Radio communications are subject to static, interference, and equipment failures. Weather conditions can create false echoes or mask genuine aircraft. In this environment of incomplete and sometimes contradictory information, human judgment becomes essential. The observer corps provides crucial backup to the radar network, but integrating their reports with radar data creates additional complexity. Observer posts report aircraft using different procedures and terminology than radar stations. A formation that appears as a single large blip on radar might be reported by observers as multiple separate aircraft. The filter room must reconcile these differences while maintaining real-time tracking of rapidly moving targets. The psychological pressure on the plotters is enormous. They understand that their work directly affects the survival of fighter pilots and civilian populations. A mistake in plotting could send RAF squadrons to the wrong location, leaving enemy bombers to reach their targets unopposed. An error in aircraft identification could result in friendly fighters being vectored away from genuine threats. Mary Wesley, a WAAF plotter who later became a successful novelist, captures the intensity of the work in her wartime diary. The responsibility is terrifying when you really think about it. You're moving little wooden blocks around a table, but each block represents real aircraft with real people inside. Get it wrong, and bombers reach London. Get it right, and our fighters have a chance to stop them. The filter room operates on a 24-hour schedule, with 3 8-hour shifts covering each day. The work is mentally exhausting, requiring constant concentration and split-second decision-making. Plotters work in a windowless basement, cut off from the outside world except for the steady stream of reports from radar stations and observer posts. The only indication of the battle raging overhead comes from the colored blocks moving across the map table. Physical working conditions are spartan by modern standards.